to Dreamhost. And so this is a pretty specific to Dreamhost. These instructions are not going to work for every hosting site that's out there. And Dreamhost works pretty well, but in order to run Rails with the latest version, you have to run it in a virtual private server. So we have to set up a VPS in Dreamhost first. So you first log in, and on the side, Dreamhost has all of these options, and one of them is VPS. That stands for Virtual Private Server. So they give you a virtual host that you have full control over. You can change the version of Ruby you have and change the Rails that you have and everything. And what you first have to do is request a VPS server from them, and it costs about $15 a month, depending on how much RAM you request. And so you can sign up for a VPS, and it takes them about maybe an hour or so to set that up for you, and they'll send you information about how to log in. And then you'll have a new server that you're deploying on, which is different than their Happy Hosting account where we set up all of our domains. So once you have the VPS set up, the next thing we have to do that we'll need in this process is an administrative user. So we go to administrative user here. And I've already done this, but you can add a new admin user, and you give it a name, and I called mine Jones Root. So if we click on this, it goes and lets me, this is what we call a super user or a administrator or a root user. It gives you full access to change everything in your little virtual private server. So I can update the operating system, everything, add different versions of Rails. So you pick a username, you put your full name just to remember it, and this is the server, the private server here. This is the number that they set up for me when I created a VPS. So that's my server number, and you just add the password just like you were going to add a normal user. So we have that set up. Then the next thing we have to do is go and create a new domain. And this is, we want to host a website on this new private server. Okay, so just like we were going to, I might say add a new domain, and I can say, I want to call it deploy rails.cis1scc.com. Some domain name, and I can have any domain name I want pointing to this virtual private host, just like I can have any domain name on my normal shared hosting site, right? So you set it up the same way, but you do it, you run it under a different user. So when they created a user for you, when you created a VPS, they gave you a user that lets you log into that private server. So my user, when I signed up for the VPS, is this dljones42. And it says on the PS 138224. So that means that I'm going to host this domain name on this private server account, which is different than the rest of them. Does that make sense so far? Any questions? We tell it where we want to deploy it, the same thing. We can choose all of these same options. And since I'm running Rails, I want to make sure you do not select this, because we're going to run this differently from the virtual host. So don't select the passenger Python apps. Can't unselect what?
Can you just unselect it? Or does it install something?
No, if I check this and install stuff, and then it would be harder to get back. So I don't check it. That's unchecked by default. And you say fully host this domain, and it will create that domain name on that virtual host now. All right, so that's all we have to do from the web side, from the Dreamhost panel. I set up VPS first, which gave me a username on a private server, and that took about an hour for them to send me that information. I set up a root user, an administrative user, through the VPS system, and then I hosted a domain under this new user that, not the root user, but this user they gave me when they signed up the VPS. Yes?
How many super users do you have?
As many as you want. Okay? So I'm done with that. I'm not going to host another domain. I already have this set up, so we're going to move on. So the next thing is there is Dreamhost has really good documentation, and a lot of it is written by the community. So the best article I found on how to do this on Dreamhost's site is called RVM. So if you search for RVM in the search box here, it will come up with, oh, that's interesting. If I searched for capital RVM, this would have come up right away. So RVM is the one I want to look at. That's the name of the wiki page. Or you can just go to wiki.dreamhost.com/RVM capitalized. And RVM stands for Ruby Version Manager. And this whole document here is what we're going to follow step by step to make sure that our virtual private server has all the right software installed on it. So there's a lot of steps we have to go through, and they have this warning here that anything in here, they expect you to be knowledgeable in Unix, but pretty much we can follow step by step here and not have too many problems. If you have a problem, then you're going to have to search and try to figure out the issues. But they are seriously not kidding about this. It's not for the faint of heart. They said this setup is not for the faint of heart. Okay. When you first sign up for a site, a VPS site, they give you all the RAM possible. They give you 2.3 gigabytes of RAM, and RAM is all important in a virtual private server. That's where everything runs. When you run Rails as a server in a host like that, the more RAM you give it, the faster your Rails project is going to run. But you also pay for that. If you want to end up with 2.3 gigs, I think it's over $400 a month. That's a lot. So for most small sites, once you set it up, they scale you back after a week to 300 megabytes of RAM, which is enough to run a small server. And you could have several thousand people hit your site a day, and I think you'd be fine. It's pretty fast. So $15 a month is fine. So all of this is done in Unix, so we need to log in to our to the new virtual private server that they set up, and they send you an email with your username and the password that you had chosen and where we're going to log into. So I'm going to log into this new site, which I called vps.cis1scc.com. I'm going to use some terminal SSH client, and in this case on Windows I'm using PuTTY. And I'm going to log in to this vps.cis1scc.com. That's the virtual private server domain name that I'm hosting in this site. So let's open that. And the first time you log in, it's going to ask you about the security. And this is so that all of your transmissions back and forth are secure. So we want to accept this key. And then we log in as the username, which was dljones42, and then my password, which I'm not going to give you. And so I'm logged in. I'm now logged into that virtual private server. It's now my own little server. It has all Unix built into it, and I can look at the version of Unix it is. It's running Linux, and it's actually a Debian version of Unix. It doesn't say that in here, but now when I'm typing, I'm running the commands as if I'm sitting in front of this virtual computer, right? So I'm controlling the remote computer directly. So I use Unix commands or Linux commands, ls-al, that lists my directories and things. And it created, when I said to host this domain, it created a folder on this site called vps.cis1.scc.com. Right? So the first thing we have to do is configure the whole operating system and update it and make sure it's running correctly, make sure I have Ruby installed correctly. And so we're going to go through this a little at a time. And let's see this free command. If I type free -m, that shows me how much RAM I have. And I only signed up for this a couple days ago, so I still have 2.3 gigabytes of RAM. They'll scale that back to 300 very shortly. So when you sign up for it, you want to configure this right away because compiling all these new versions of Ruby and everything take time, and the more RAM you have, the faster it's going to work. All right, so we're going to go through this step by step, and you can actually copy and paste these commands, but I'll try to explain them a little bit. These are the commands. This $sign is like the prompt over here, this $sign, so we don't copy that. We're going to copy this command here all the way across, one line at a time. And when I run this, it's going to, curl is a program that I taught you guys in 149 that actually goes out and acts like a browser, and it goes and gets a file from a specific website. Okay, so this is going to do that, and then it's going to pipe this to a new instance of a command shell, which is, I don't want to get into that right now. So doing that, it actually goes out to the website, downloads the file that it needs, and it's going to install basically the Ruby version manager. That's what we want. We want to install the Ruby version manager, and that lets us change the versions of Ruby. Since Ruby changes all the time, we have Ruby version 187 and 191 and 192 and 193, and you can even look at you could probably find a version 2.0 of Ruby that's on the bleeding edge that isn't released yet. And RVM lets you switch between those versions. Okay. So this is a line that's creating a text variable, basically, that's going to then put it into these profiles. So we have to do that. We'll do copy and paste that into my shell. Then this line, what this does is it takes that variable and stuffs it into my profile, which is, this is a file. If I were to look at this file, .bash profile, this file has in it some startup information. It's a lot like a startup folder in Windows. It says to set some variables and things like that. So I've already run these two commands. I don't want to add those back to my profile. This adds it to the bash profile. This adds it to the bash RC file. And then what this does is it executes the profile. So it's as if I log in again. Every time I log in, this profile gets reloaded into my environment and sets up some environmental variables and some paths and things like that, a lot like DOS commands do. So what that does, this command loads the profile again as if I logged in, because I've changed that file. So I don't have to log back out and log back in. It's reinitializing that file for me. All right, then we're down to using RVM. RVM is now installed for me. I can just type RVM, and it says this is the version I'm running, and I can do. That's interesting. I installed a new version, so it wants me to reload the version of RVM. Okay, good. So you can look at, there's all kinds of information about RVM on their website, and it lets us switch between Ruby versions. Okay, so if I do this RVM list known, what that does is it lists out all the versions of Ruby that RVM knows about. These are Ruby 186. I could go back that far, 187, 191, and then all the different patch levels. This P stands for patch level 125, patch level 194. So they found a bug in Ruby or a security issue, and they re-released it. And this is the current most patched version of Ruby 193. It's patch 327. And you could even get the 2.0 preview. If I want to look at Ruby 2.0, I could see what it is. It's not released yet, but you're running on the bleeding edge, definitely on that. Then they have JRuby versions, Rubinius, all kinds of different. There's a Mac Ruby, Iron Ruby. So I want to use. I want to install Rail. I'm sorry. I want to use the version 193, and it will go and find the latest version. So this is a lot like installing a gem. Instead of installing a gem, I'm installing the actual whole Ruby language. All right. Now RVM doesn't work on Windows. It only works on a Mac and Linux. On Windows, there's a program called PIK, P-I-K, which lets you switch Ruby versions as well. But I don't like it. I don't use it. So I'm going to install version 193, and if I hadn't had this already installed, it would go out and fetch the source for the Ruby language, which is all written in C. It brings it down, it compiles it for this specific Linux version, and it installs it into the operating system. So I now have Ruby installed. I can say Ruby -V, and I should be able to see I have the latest patch version of 193 installed now. And I could install Ruby version 186, and I could switch back and forth with them using this command. My default version, I want to be using 193, so I'm going to use that command as well. And now it's the same, but if I type Ruby, I'm going to have the 193 here. So that lets me switch between different versions of Ruby completely. All right, now I've got Ruby installed. I can now install Rails. This is just like running on Windows, right? I need to do a gem install Rails. It's going to go out and find Rails, install all the required dependencies, all the gems, eventually. Any questions on where we're at so far?
So is MySQL already installed on the server, or do you have to install that?
You'd have to install that. Actually, for MySQL, what you can do is go out and using Dreamhost, I could set up a MySQL server, just like we do with PHP in the goodies. I can set up a MySQL database and then just use that configuration. So this server, this virtual private server, can connect to the MySQL on the free side of the. So I don't have to have MySQL installed on my server.
Yeah.
It's going to go connect through a web, a web TCP connection. All right, so I have Rails 3.2.9 installed. Everybody, we went up from 3.2.8, so that's fine. For this demonstration, it's going to be fine. So let's go back. I need to. We can skip this. I don't want to install a pre-version of Rails, a preview version. I want to get the latest version of Rails, which, since I didn't specify a version, it picked up 3.2.9. That's the released version. No, I'm just going to create one. So let me delete what I have. I had already done this. Interesting. Let me pause. Okay, I deleted my old version of the whole project that I have up there. And this is the folder now. This is the domain that I'm setting up, just like in the free hosting side. this is where I'm going to put, this is the root of my website. Okay? So I want to create a new project inside of that folder, a new Rails project inside of that folder. So how do we do a new Rails project? Just like this, I can well, I don't want to do that. Let's just do Rails new, and then the name of the website is going to put it in this folder, right? That's the name of my Rails project, and it will create a folder called this. It's actually already created, but it will put all of the Rails files into that directory. All right, so it creates it. See how fast it runs? It runs pretty good. And now it's running the bundle install to go get all of the files, which is pretty fast. Got everything it wanted. Now I can change directory into that. And this is now a normal Rails project. It has the gem file in it, the app folders, the DB folders config, everything just like you should be familiar with now, right? So that is my Rails project. All right. The next thing we need to do is install Passenger, which is a gem that is a web server. So when we were doing our projects on our local machine, we used a server called Webrick, right? When you ran Rails server, it started Webrick. And Webrick is fine for development use, but it's very slow in the production world. So we would never use that in production. So Passenger is also written as a gem. I can install it as a gem, and it will run a lot faster than Webrick. Mongrel is another server as well. So I want to install that. So gem, install Passenger. It's going to go out and find the files and install it. So that's fine. Now there's a problem with Passenger and Dreamhost, or this version of Dreamhost, Debian, the Linux that we have here. So we have to patch this, and so these are some commands. wget is a lot like curl. It actually goes out and gets a file and saves it to your computer. So we're gonna run these two to apply a patch to the Passenger server. And it goes and downloads the file into a file called runtimeinstaller.rb.patch. And then we run this patch command. I'll copy all of this all the way down here. And it will actually change the gem and add new lines and change specific pieces of the gem so that it'll work. Okay, you have to do that. Signed. I tried to skip that and it failed, so don't do that. All right. Any questions where we're at so far? All right. So now when I start Passenger, it will actually install and everything. But this is for a production server of Rails. We need to have this gem called the Ruby Racer installed. And this is almost every hosting site I've seen has to have this Ruby Racer, and it helps with the JavaScript libraries. So what this command does, cd changes me into the directory, so I'm there. If I do a pwd, I'm inside of my root of my hosted site. Now this is a command. Sed is a text editor command that will add a line of text to a file. Okay, so they did it instead of editing the file and adding the gem Ruby Racer to the gem file. This does it in one line. So the author of this wiki did this so that it's easier for you. But I can edit this file, my gem file. I can use the VI editor, which is a text editor running on Linux, and I can edit the gem file. And all they're saying is, with that line, is to scroll this line here. What they're doing is they're looking for this line. They're searching for the line with a sharp gem, the ruby racer in it, and they're replacing it with this line. So what does that mean? Well, they just took the comment out. They uncommented out this line. All right. So running this command changes the gem file, and then the next command is just to bundle install it. Okay. So let's. I'll run that command just to show you what it did. Notice that that one was commented, but if I run this entire command here, and I look at the file again, you'll see that it changed it. It took the comment out. Okay, that's all it did. All right? And I don't want to teach VI, but if you want to learn an editor, that's a good one to use on Linux to make quick changes to files. All right, then I've changed the gem file. I basically said to add this Ruby Racer gem, so I need to run bundle, right? Bundle runs bundle install, and it installs the Ruby Racer for me. All right, so now this command updates the actual entire Linux operating system. This will update all of the little packages and everything that runs the whole operating system. So the best way to do this is not to do this command I've found. What I need to do is change my user now to that admin user, because to change, just like on Windows, I can't install some software on Windows without an administrative privileges, right? I have to have admin privileges. Same on Linux, I need to have admin privileges to change the operating system itself. So I need to switch users to my admin guy, which I set up as Jones root, and use that person's admin password. So now I'm logged in, I've switched users to my root guy, and he's got enough permissions to do anything I want. Okay? Does that make sense so far? I'm now an administrative guy. That, yeah, super user or switch user, that's what the SU does. Elevates me now to this guy's permissions, and I can do anything I want with this whole installation. So this sudo apt-get update, what that does, it goes out to the Linux distribution main servers and checks the versions of software that I have installed on my private server here versus what is the latest releases. So Linux gets updated constantly. They fix security issues constantly. So this is a good idea to do whenever you start up a new server like this. So you just run sudo apt-get update, and it will update the entire operating system. Now this will take some time, so I'm not going to run it again. It'll take 10, 15 minutes to update the entire system, because it downloads source code, actual C files, and compiles them locally on your computer. So it's going to go through a lot of lines and do some stuff here. Well, that's why I changed users. He doesn't say to do that, right? I changed users to my admin first, and then I can run. I actually don't need to do the sudo. I can just say apt-get update, and it will go through and find all the stuff for me. And then if we're going to run a MySQL server database, then I'd have to install this MySQL client, and that's just so that this virtual server can connect through the MySQL protocol to another server for your database. All right. So we're done with everything, and we can actually try to start our server. Okay, I've already done the bundles installs. I now need to start my server, my Rails server, in production mode. And to do that, we have to set this environment variable here, Rails_env equals production, before I start the server. And in Rails, I would normally say Rails space minus S, right, to start a server. And that would start the WebRIC server. But I want to run passenger. So I'm going to run passenger start. And what do you think this minus P means? Okay, so the minus P 8000 says to run on port 8000. That means that the server is going to be listening on port 8000 for incoming requests. All right? So when I first run this the first time, it will try to let's see, why is that? Maybe I already have it running like that. Let's see. I do. I must have it running already. All right, pause. All right, so it is running. If I go to my site, port 8000, it's actually running and the Rails comes up. The problem is that I need to stop this. So the easiest way is to reboot my server. So let's just do that. Because I haven't set up a cron job, we'll talk about in a minute. I'll just reboot my server here from the Dreamhost control panel. And let's reboot it. Cron. We'll talk about that in a minute. Yes, reboot it. I want to reboot it. And that should kill me from my connection eventually. When it reboots, my shell will die, hopefully. And it takes a few minutes to reboot it. Any questions where we are so far? And when you're first setting this up, this isn't a step you'd have to do. It's because I already had it set up, so. Come on. We'll pause until this goes up. Okay, so that's interesting. It finally killed it, so my PuTTY connection got killed. So I'll have to restart that and log in again. So it's all done. We'll run PuTTY again. Log into VPS.cs1. Is that what it was?
That's your super user?
Apparently that's not it. All right, so I'm back in line again. Back in, I can change directory to my root. This is my Rails project, and I want to run passenger inside of this just like I would run the Rails site. So I'm going to run this line, Rails env production passenger start on port 8000. And the first time it runs, it actually goes and gets the information necessary. It compiles itself, and it starts the server listening on port 8000. Okay, so the first time you run this is going to take a little bit longer. And you can see that it actually did a few things here. It compiled some code, and it started it up. So after this time, this will work faster. All right. So now it's actually running. I can go to my domain name :8000, and it should load the page. And you can see this is the page that comes up, and you can see that I had a routing error for this asset. Okay, it's not getting even my Rails ping little logo here, right? But it served the page. All right, so passenger is working. So now we need to do some things to make sure that our production server is running correctly. All right, so I'm going to build just a quick little app in Rails, add some scaffolding, and then we'll show you how to do some production deployment. But at this point, my server actually is running on port 8000. I can test things and make sure it all works. And then in a minute, we will show you how to set that up to run for real and to set up a proxy so that we can go to port 80 and it will go to port 8000 for us automatically. And then how to set up what they call it a cron job, which during a reboot, we want certain applications to start up automatically, right? So if Dreamhost has power failure and all their computers go out, when they come back up, my little VPS is going to start up. But I want to make sure that when it starts up my passenger server. Right? I want it to start up again so that my website won't be down. But we'll do that in a minute. So I'm in my Rails directory, and there are some commands now that I need to set up. One thing I could do is just copy all of these files from my using FTP. I could transfer the project I've been working on for the quarter up here and replace this web server with that. That's one thing I could do. But for now, I'm just going to create some quick things. So I can say Rails, generate, scaffold, blog, title is a string, author is a string, content is a text, and that'll generate some information for me, which is pretty fast on this computer. Let's generate some scaffolding too. I could say Rails, generate. I'll just go back and call this article, so I have a couple of things here. And call it the same stuff. All right, so if I were to look in my database folder, I've got these migrations now. This is running SQLite 3, so I don't have anything yet. If I look at db/migrate, I can see the 2 migration files. So what do I need to do? Rake. No. db migrate, right? So to do things in production mode, I need to have this variable set, this env equals production. So to do anything like this, I need to prepend or put this in my Rails command. So I say rake db migrate and put this production at the end of it so that it will rake my production database as opposed to the development database. Okay, so if I look back again at my migration, my database folder, you see that my production.SQLite 3 has data in it now, right? It's got 6,144 bytes. So the production side, if you don't put that env, it will create a development.SQLite 3 site. By default, without that environment variable set, it goes to development. So we want to make sure that it's all in production.
But that makes the default that environment equals production.
Yeah.
Does that make it default on your server?
I don't know what you're saying. You mean running that env once should set it in the environment? It should, but I do it explicitly so I know I'm doing the right thing. I want to make sure that I'm running the right database because that's messed me up a lot of times. All right, so there's one more thing I need to do. And remember, a long time ago we talked about how Rails will compile the assets for us, right? In development mode, it delivers all the CSS for us automatically, but in a production mode, it squishes them all into one file. Remember that? Puts all the CSS into one file, puts all the JavaScript into one file. it makes all of the images have a hash on the end of the name for cache busting sake, right? Remember that the image name itself has information on it. So to do that, there's a rake task, and I want to say rake assets precompile. Okay, that's going to go through all my style sheets, my JavaScript, my images, and compile them into the right file names, add the hash in the end of things, and so that's all done. So now if I go to my public folder and look at my assets folder, look at all of these files I have now in here. It has an application.bunchofgarbage.css, and it also created a gzip version of that same thing. So if a browser requests gzipped versions of assets, it will ship it down faster. So that's a lot smaller file. If I look at it in here, let's make this bigger. The gzip version is, a third or half the size of the unzipped version, and it also leaves the files in here that don't have a hash on the end of it. But this is what's actually going to be shipped to the browser. And then any files like any images, it converts those and puts the same hash on the end of it. This lets you know that if I change the file, I'm going to recompile my assets. That name is going to change, and so the browsers, when they request that image, won't find it, and they'll find this new image instead. It busts the cache. All right, so now I can run my passenger again, and let's see if everything works. Yeah. Yeah. Oh, I got to get into the right directory. Get back up into the root of my Rails directory. And then we're going to run the server again just to show you that it's working. And now when I reload my page, I get my little image here, right? It actually found the image. And I can go to /blogs, and it goes and finds my blog page. I can do a new blog and create new stuff. And I can go to articles, and articles works. Isn't that cool? All right, so some more. I know some of you guys are leaving, but I'm going to keep talking. Some other things when you're dealing with production before we move on to setting this up to run all the time. If I make a change to my server, let's say I log in. I'm going to log in to another session. All right, so I'm in the same VPS, but I'm logged in under two windows, two different sessions. Let's say here my server is running, right? It's in production. Live people are coming from all over the world, and they want to see this. And I make a change. I'm deploying a new set of files. The server doesn't know, because it's in production, it doesn't automatically pick up new files. I have to tell it that I have new files to load. But I don't want to stop the server and restart it again, because then people, they're coming in, they're streaming, I've got 1 million views a day, right? I don't want them to be cut off for a few seconds while the server reboots. So let's say I add a new model, user with a name as a string and an email as a string. Let's just do that. I don't want to do that. I want to do it scaffold. All right, so this generates all the new scaffold. I do the rake, db migrate, and I'm going to make sure that my Rails env is production here. And I've added my new stuff, created my new table. If I go to look at users, they're not there. Okay, because the server is already running. It's running over here. It doesn't go out and get the new files every time. Whereas in development mode, every time I make a change, the server reloads every file, which is why it's a lot slower. So to make it pick up the new stuff, there's a file that Passenger looks for in a folder called temp. So if I look in the folder called temp, TMP, there's nothing here. And if I want to tell Passenger to restart, to reload the files, I have to create a file in there called restart. Okay, so restart.txt. So a nice feature of Unix is that I can say touch, and that will create a new file and change the date and timestamp of that file to now. All right, so if I touch temp/restart.txt, it creates a file called restart.txt with the current date and time, so that Passenger looks for that file every once in a while and says, oh, you want to restart the server, and it's got a current date and timestamp. So it will restart itself without doing anything to shut itself down. And if I go to my users now, it should pick up all of those new files that I created, and now I'm back to working again. Isn't that great?
So how's that different from just shutting your server down?
Well, if I shut it down, everybody from all over the world has not been able to get to my site. It leaves the server up, but just reloads the files. So it's still able to serve pages at the same time while it's reloading the files. So the first couple of requests might be a little slower, but at least they don't get a server down error. All right? So that's the restart thing. And if I just do that again, it's going to put the new timestamp on it, and so I don't have to delete the file. I just have to touch it every time I want it to reload all the files. Does that make sense? All right, so let's go into the last little bits here. Let's All right, good. So let's stop my server, and to stop the server, just like in the Rails WebRick, I hit Control-C, and it stops the server. And we'll go back to the wiki. It's got some information here about how to start it for real. And this is going to start it and set it so that it stays running in memory. Oops. And it leaves it as a detached process, is what they call it. So now I can still look at stuff, right? If I want to look at the logs, remember the command tail -f log /production.log will keep a running list of the log. So if I do something here, it will show in the log file. And so that's a quick way to look at things, make sure the server is running. Control-C to get out of that. And so now I'm all happy. But the last thing is, it's running on port 8000, which is not a standard port. I want people to be able to get to my site by going to just port 80, which without the port number in the URL, right? So they talk about this here in this proxy, and we're going to do this using this proxy link that takes me to my Dreamhost panel. And we need to set up a proxy server port. And that's down here in the bottom part. And we tell it, what do I want to proxy? The domain name that I want to proxy. And it's got a list of all the domain names that I have, right? And I already have mine set up. So I chose vps.cis1scc.com here. And then the one thing you need to remember is you have to click on this. This messed me up for a while. If I click on this, it takes away the URL to proxy. If I don't, it'll add /URL to proxy up here, which is a Dreamhost bug in my opinion. And then the port number we want to proxy. So what we're telling it is that when somebody comes to port 80 to this VPS, I'm going to redirect them to port 8000. That's really all it's doing. Okay, so the port number I want them to go to is 8000, which is the same number that I chose to start my server as. Remember when I did the -P 8000? That's the server port it's running on. So those have to match. And I say add proxy server. So this is my proxy server. The editing doesn't work at all that I can find, so if you make a mistake, you're better off deleting it and adding it again. So now, all I have to do is come and take the 8000 off, and I'm back to a nice normal website. Right? I can go to articles. I can go to my blogs. Isn't that great? Pretty cool. So we just touched the surface of deploying. There's other things you can use like Capistrano, which is a Ruby gem that helps you ship up new files to the server, and you can actually tell it to restart the server as well in a script. So you hit it once and it goes and logs in for you using SSH, files the stuff, touches that restart.txt, and restarts the server. So there's a lot of things you can do to automate this, but this gives you a first start. So everything is working. This is cool. And it's pretty fast if I actually hit the button. Pretty fast. That's a lot faster than even running locally here with a development server, because now we're in production. Everything is cached. It uses as much memory as it can, and it's pretty fast. All right. The last thing is, if I go back to my wiki, is that I want to deal with setting it up so that passenger starts when I restart the server or when Dreamhost goes down and comes back up again. And that's what they call a cron job, and that's like a startup folder in Windows or a startup task in Windows. Every time it comes up, I want it to run this command. So I'm basically running the same command that I did, but I'm going to copy this command and edit this. And in the cron, in the goodies, it lets me set these up. And I'm going to add a new cron job. And restart VPS server, you call it whatever you want. We're going to run it as my PS server, my DL Jones server on my PS server. And I can email this out if I want to have this come to me. I could say dave.jones@scc.spokane.edu. And this is the command that it's going to run. This says go to username, obviously has to change, right? dljones42. dljones42. And you can find that to make sure. If I just say print working directory in my Linux, this is the command it's talking about, right? This is my path to my site. Then I want to run this Rails env. Oh, my domain.com has got to change. It's going to be vps.cis1scc.com because that's the directory where my Rails project is. And then inside of that directory, it's going to run that same command that I ran before. So that's all it's doing. It's changing. It's loading my bash shell commands. It's changing directories to my root Rails project. And then it's running the same Rails passenger command to start up the server. And that's all it's doing. And I want to run this on server reboot only. I don't want to run it every hour. Otherwise, I'd have new servers running every hour, right? So that's all I have to do. And make sure this locking, we will only want this to run once. And say add. And so now when the server gets rebooted, that cron job should get executed. So let's test that. Right now I can get to my server. Right, I can reload, new blog, everything's working. If I reboot my server from my VPS from the Dreamhost here, reboot this guy, say, yes, I really want to reboot it. So it queues it for rebooting, and let's see if after it reboots, I can get to the server again. Let's pause. Oh, there. So it restarted. So my PuTTY connections are gone. And let's see if I can still get to my server. Now, it might take a minute to actually reboot, so. Temporarily unavailable. So it's in the booting process. Come on, work for me. Shouldn't take too long to come up. Let me pause. So the server is back up. I can log back in again. So everything is happy, but it looks like my cron job didn't execute correctly. So I have some error with my cron job. So let's restart my passenger again. And I can just go back and find the command using my up arrow here. Here we go. So now it's running again. Should be running again. Takes it a minute. There we go. So I'm back up again. So there's something wrong with my cron job. So let's see if we can figure that out. Let me pause it. All right. I think it's probably the reason is that the cron job just wasn't set up yet completely. That might take a few minutes. So I would wait another half hour and try to reboot it and make sure that that's working right. But otherwise, that's a quick overview of using Dreamhost specifically for hosting your site, and that's not too bad, $15 a month. And you could put more than one server on this as well. I could have multiple hostings on this one server. So, and all have the same Rails version and everything, so I think that would work pretty well. I would just, to do it another one, I could just say manage domains, host another domain, put it on that same PS, and it's going to create a new directory in that same, in my same virtual host. And instead of here, I'm going to have a multiples of these VPS directories, and I could just add more and more into that. Now, at some point, you're obviously going to run out of memory. You can only tell that when your site slows down. And so I would think you might be able to do 2 or 3 small sites on one virtual host like this. All right? Any questions? Oh, yeah, you charge the customer for that. Absolutely. All right.